Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. When Veda and I first talked about this event to kickstart the book tour, we said, what did we say, 5? We said 5, 8 people would be nice. She said, I have a friend in Dubai. I said, yeah, I have a friend. If we get our friends together, that's fine. We'll have a little chat. We'll have a coffee. We plan to just kind of meet at like a Starbucks or something like that. And here we are, 100 and something of us, which I think is really, really amazing. And I think it's clear that we can attribute this to her amazing energy and this sacred knowledge that Veda has made her life's work to spread and to teach. And she keeps saying she's learning as she goes along, which I think is true for all of us. When I first learned about Veda's work, I honestly felt like it was the bridge, at least for me, and my understanding between what I know and understand of the physical world and what I believed was out there. And I felt like that was really something that drew me to her and that inspired me to reach out and say, look, let's do something. Because there is so much more that we learn from her about our world and consciousness, and there's no one better to spend this evening with. I also think that it aligns very closely with our values as an organization and as a family, just in the spirit of inquiry, just constantly at Fortis Education, we like to teach our children to just constantly be curious and even question science, and don't believe everything that you see and don't believe everything that you hear, and live with that spirit of inquiry, so self-inquiry, inquiry of the world around us, and now more and more in our education systems to think about what's even beyond that. So I'm excited about today. Thank you for your patience. Traffic, what to do? We tried. If both of us are glowing, it's because we've just had a run around the souk and sweated buckets. I mean, it was crazy. We got lost thanks to me. I thought I knew my way around the gold souk. I haven't been there in 20 years. I don't know why I thought that. It was crazy. But we made it here. We had a fun afternoon. We bought some frankincense and amber and things like that. So here we are. A lot of people to thank for today. The people at school who've worked tirelessly, our entire team here working after hours to make sure that we can meet when school's out to actually make this happen. Special thanks to both my mums, Mrs. Mankani, my mother-in-law, who's the founder of Fortis Education, continues to inspire me every day. I won't tell you her age because you won't believe it. And my mum, who I've learned everything about faith and spirituality from, who inspires me every day. She's also one of the most beautiful people I know, so thank you. My husband, who's late, but he's on his way, for being a part of everything that I do, even if he doesn't understand it, even the crazy things that I ask him to do. He's my perpetual guinea pig for everything. And there's a lot more people, but I think we need to get started, and I hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. Assalamu alaikum. I am dressed today. We went to the souk and I thought, well, it'd be nice to wear something a little bit traditional just to celebrate being here in Dubai, because this is my first ever visit. And so it's been very special for me. We did quite an adventure today. I have a lot to share. It's a very important topic, talking about water. What I would like is a little glass of water. If we do have one, that would be lovely. And I'm going to start with my healing journey. So many people, they always ask me, what got you into doing this work in the first place? And it kind of came out of tragedy. So I was in a horrendous car accident over 20 years ago. We went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice, and the driver was decapitated. It was one of the worst accidents where someone survived, and that was me. And so many incredible things happened from that. But over 20 years, I had 8 surgeries, mostly for bowel resections, because the seatbelt had crushed my internal organs. And actually 3 doctors told me that I would never be able to have children based on the amount of injuries that I had. So I had a child for every doctor that told me I couldn't, because I hate being told what I can't do. And one of the things that I did when they told me that was just put what they said on the shelf, not disregarding it, but also allowing my body to make the decision for itself. Just because somebody tells you your body can't do something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And I know that I'm proof of that. So on my 8th surgery, I went in for bowel surgery, and I woke up surrounded by doctors staring at me saying, you didn't recover well, and you now have showers of blood clots in your lungs, and you have to be on warfarin, which is a blood thinner, for potentially the rest of your life. I was in my early 20s, healthy and fit outside of the car accident injuries, and I was like, what do you mean? And so they said I was going to die if I didn't take it, so for 3 months, nearly 4 months, I took warfarin. And then I had a clear chest x-ray, and then they were encouraging me, keep on taking it. And I knew my body could heal itself. And I made a decision that I don't tell other people to do. You have to make a decision for yourself. But I decided that I was going to stop taking it and be the guinea pig, I guess, of my own health. And I was determined to find natural ways to heal my body. So I'm just going to, this does look a little bit different than mine. I might use the clicker. Okay, so this was the car accident that I was in, just to get some kind of idea of gravity. So it's like a miracle that I'm even here standing talking to you at all. So when I went on this healing journey, I spoke to a friend of mine who's a medical doctor but also practiced Ayurvedic medicine. And he said to me off the record, and immediately I'm like, why is this off the record? He said, if you can find a natural emphasis on natural, not ionized alkaline water, it might help to bring your body back into balance. And I thought, oh, well, I kind of like that idea of starting with the foundation of life, of water. So I went ahead and I did 2-week trials using different alkaline waters from New Zealand. And it's easy in New Zealand. We have many springs and a lot of them are alkaline, so it wasn't difficult. I didn't really notice anything particularly much, but by this time I had a wellness centre, and I had a client come to me and said, oh, you know, I know this old guy, he's got a beautiful artisan water. It's 9.9 in pH, which stands for power or potential of hydrogen, which is extremely high. And he's only giving it to cancer patients, and maybe you want to try. So I went to see him, told him my story, and he gave me a month's worth to try. Within 3 days, I noticed a difference in something so many people don't like talking about, particularly in the Western world, and that is about bowel motions. It is an indicator of our internal health, and there's so much constipation in the world that people don't even want to talk about it, because a lot of people just don't actually drink any water, which is quite shocking to me. And so things started moving, and given all the bowel surgery, I'm like, okay, something good happened. And then 10 days later, I had all these bumps coming up on my arm and jaw that were really painful on my right side. And one was so angry, and as gross as it sounds, I ended up getting these tweezers because it feels like there's something in there. And I picked this little shard of green glass out of my arm. And between day 10 and 12, I'd picked 27 pieces of green glass out of my arm that had actually been in my body for over 20 years, because the man who died owned a nightclub, and in the back of the car were crates of Steinlager beer, which is a lager in a green glass bottle. And when the car rolled, the right side of my body got mostly green glass and the left side got mostly windscreen. So my question was, how can just drinking this water possibly purge my body like this? So I thought, well, maybe it's, is it just me? And so I started trialing people from the wellness centre, and an interesting thing happened. Outside of everybody's energy improving, everybody's eyesight improved. Your eye lens is 99% highly ordered, structured water. And it's not a regular type of water. It's what's known as fourth phase water. So we have a liquid, solid, gas, and then a type of gel or plasma. And so we literally see everything through the lens of water, but we don't even think about that. Now, what was interesting is my dad, he's a big Maori guy, and that's the native New Zealand people. And he is a well-known fisherman. He's kind of a celebrity fisherman guy in New Zealand. And he had a fish fin go between his knuckles a long, long time ago. And when he started drinking it, this leftover little bit of fish fin started to make its way out of his knuckles. And so that was really interesting. And then I had a client who said, look, I have a friend who has stage 4 cancer and doesn't want to go down the chemo track yet. He wants to do a big, long water fast. So he fasted with this water for 27 days, and halfway through it, he found that his tumour had reduced by half, and then 3 weeks later, he had what they called spontaneous healing. And there were 2 other patients with cancer that did these long water fasts, not as long as him, but between day 10 and 15, they saw significant changes in their tumours. So I knew there was something special about this water. But there is and I tend to tell stories as I go along, the stories of my life. And so I don't want to forget the story. These are my children. They're much more grown up now. But the little guy in the green, his name is Rama the Charmer. And something very sweet happened. So when he was 3, and actually this is about the same age, I think he was nearly 3 then, he used to spy on me a lot and hide, behind things and spy on me. And I had a new friend come down from Christchurch. And she was saying to me, tell me about your car accident. And I started to tell her everything about my accident. And Rama was doing the spying thing, and he'd never heard me talk about it before. And because he's just a little guy, it's not something I'd normally share with him. And when I finished telling her all about it, he jumped out of his hiding place and he said, I remember that, Mummy. I remember the window wipers and the tyres, and I came down out of the clouds and I went like this and I saved you. And when I knew you were okay, I climbed back up the ladder into the clouds. I'm like, oh, my baby, thank you. There's always little miracles everywhere we look, even in times where that feels so hard. So I've been trying all these incredible kind of thought processes on for size. Like, the biggest thing was the question of what is water? And one of the other questions was what made this water different? And then I started to wonder, well, what about holy waters? And my thought process just evolved. And when I asked the question, what is water? You go to a scientist and they're going to tell you it's H2O. It's 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. But that doesn't make me feel connected to water because they're just words. What's the key thing that changed my road in life? When somebody said, actually, no, that's not entirely true. Water is actually only 1 part matter, and that matter is the hydrogens and oxygen. The rest is photonic light, which means that water is a lighthouse. And inside every single person here are trillions of water molecules. In fact, there are more water molecules in your body than all of the stars in the perceivable universe. And yet we're not taught this in school at all. In fact, mostly what we're taught is about the hydrological system. I think it's really important to venture out into the understanding a bit more about water, because that equals the understanding of your own potential. So I started wondering what's out there. What resonates for me? Someone said to me, well, the 2 hydrogens are feminine in the mode of levity, and the large oxygen is masculine in the mode of gravity, and together they create liquid water on Earth and balance. And I thought, yeah, that makes me feel something. You see, I come from a culture, in the Maori culture, where we have a saying which is, I am the river and the river is me. This is a culture where there was a bird called the huia bird that was going extinct, and the tribe that identified with the huia bird felt that they were going extinct too, because they didn't see themselves as separate from that bird. So it's easy for me to start looking differently at different things. So I was going along the questioning of, well, what's out there? There's a new science of water, a very important science of water. And many of you probably have heard of Masaru Emoto's work. And what he did, even though he wasn't embraced by the scientific community, was open the doorway for people to see themselves as bodies of water, sensitive to thoughts and sounds and words and music and frequencies. And that helped people like me to be much more accepted in this work. So he would flash freeze water, look down a microscope, and photograph the crystallographic ice. So there were 3 people who inspired me to start this work, and Emoto was one of them. So I don't want to forget about this. So I called this the waters because water actually didn't used to be called water. In olden times, water was actually called the waters because it was considered to be a holy and sacred body of water. Think about how, in English anyway, we use the term the headwaters, the mouth of the river, the body of water. They're very reflective of the human. And so the waters was reduced to water when Romans brought plumbing into being and people started to see their waste being taken away with water. And now we're trying to reduce it back to H2O, but I see a renaissance coming back. Now, where the word waters or the waters is still used in the English language is when we say her waters broke. Because there is this little reminder that the waters is sacred. So this is Emoto's work. Well, one little example. He really doesn't need a lot of introduction. I'm sure you've seen it. Now, this has not been so well known. This is the work of a friend of mine called Laurent Costa. He's a French microscopic photographer, and there is not one part of Laurent that wanted to experiment on water. Very similar way to me. For him, water was his spiritual teacher. He wanted to invite or inspire water to share whatever it wanted with him. But every now and then he couldn't help it but smile at the water before he flash froze it and photographed it, and he would get smiley faces back. He would get images even of like his cat that would come and look at the water. He would get hearts. He wrote a book called Journey into the Heart of Water. He even got this, where he put his bottle of water on top of one of Leonardo da Vinci's books and got an image in the ice crystals of the mother, the Madonna and child, which is really quite amazing. So what we're seeing here is art, and it has a different energy than geometry. And one of the wonderful things was studying archaeology when I was at university. And one of the things I was so fascinated about was ancient symbols and symbology and ancient cave paintings, because art gives us a window into the ancient world of what it was like. Art stands the test of time. We can still today, thousands of years later, get a glimpse into what it was like for those ancient people based on what they painted. So art is actually a very sophisticated type of language. So to see that water could form in art inspired me very much. And the third person was a man called Thomas Hieronymus. He was a radionic engineer, and he made a very interesting observation going into a Parisian meat market on a very cold and frosty day. he noticed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. An example would be that the frost formed into the shape of a liver organ above a liver organ, and so on and so forth. And his hypothesis was that the water in the blood was sharing information with the water in the air, because water is always in communication with itself and it's not only a liquid. And because the information in the air was, when it hit the glass, it took on the information and became in form because it was so cold and was able to do that. So it was given a conducive environment to show up, so to speak. And that amazed me because he saw that with his naked eye. And 10 years ago, I didn't have a microscope, but I was very curious. And I thought, well, the secret seems to be in the freezing, where the unseen becomes seen. So what shall I do? How can I know if water really has this thing we call memory? And to be honest, I don't even know that's the right word. And I sometimes wonder, what if it's not water memory, but what if water is dreaming? What if water is imagining? What if it's just something a little bit different than we are saying it is? And I say that because of some of the things I've seen in my work, and which you're going to see in a second. So I thought, okay, let me try something. I was doing some research and development for some people. I got a glass petri dish, put some water in it, and I thought I'm going to project a thought into the water, and I'm going to stick it in the freezer with the peas and broccoli and everything, and I'm just going to see if anything shows up. And I noticed that there was a little bit of fluff floating around in the dish, so I was like, oh my God. So I put my hand in to take out the fluff, and I consciously thought, oh, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's quote-unquote memory. And I thought, well, that'll do. Stuck it into the freezer and froze it solid. Now, I have to say I haven't frozen water solid in 9 years because I discovered something very important about freezing stages, but this was my first ice image. And when I pulled it out of the freezer, I got a very, very clear hand in the ice. And it took me back because it's a little creepy. It looks like an X-ray of my hand. And so I thought, oh, I wasn't really expecting that. And I think that's part of the key, is to not expect water to do what you want, because water is wild. And water is very responsive to an open mind and an open heart. So I thought, oh, well, I want to try this again. So I went to the ocean, collected some seawater, because I thought, well, if any water is going to be naturally informed, it's probably going to the ocean. So I put a thin layer of seawater into my petri dish and tentatively waited outside the freezer. And I thought, gosh, if I see something, then maybe this isn't random. And so I got this amazing fish in the ice, and you can see that it's kind of feathery. That's because seawater or salt water freezes slightly differently than spring water. I got this cool, well, my children always want me to add this in because they think it's cool, this skull in the ice as well. And I look at this, knowing what I know now, and I really do think it's amazing that I got any imagery at all. Because when you freeze water solid, it freezes in 3 layers, and the third layer covers it all the way over with solates, or what's in the water, which darkens the ice, and it has compacted layers above it. So I'm going to touch on my freezing method. I've just talked about it. So this is the difference between the old technique, which was just freezing solid, and the new one. So you might notice that the golden one looks like an arrowhead. Now, my son Rama, he did that one all by himself. He was trying to con me into buying him a bow and arrow. He said, Mum, I've been named after Lord Rama. I should have my bow and arrow. And so I thought, well, I was on the fence. And he said, he's very clever. He said, well, if I can get an arrow into the ice, will you get it for me? Like, points for ingenuity. And so I'm like, maybe. He knows a maybe was probably going to be a yes. And so what he did was really unique, and this is why I love it when children do this. He got his imaginary bow and arrow. He pulled his bow back, and he shot his arrow into his petri dish, When he knew it had gone in there, he froze the water. He used my short-term freezing method, which we're going to discuss in a second. He pulled it out and he took this photo. But what you can see is there's so much light coming through it. And so when you look at my work, you'll notice there's lots of different colours, and that's because the background colours play a part in the work, and I like to do that. Some scientists would probably prefer to just have a plain background, but it's up to you. Anybody can do this work. So there are 3 stages of freezing, as I mentioned, and I think of them like spirit, blood, and body. The first stage is where we would take the water out, where there's ice and liquid. We drain the liquid away and we photograph the remaining crystallography, and that takes about 5 minutes and 20 seconds, around about. The next one is when you've overfrozen it and there's 2 layers of ice with water in between, and then you have a solid. So I mentioned different stages or types of water, and I'm going to give you a very good example that the stage I take the water out is not regular ice. So my friend Christina, she used a glass baking tray and she froze her water, and you can see it's designed something beautiful. Well, as she's holding the dish up, something rather unusual happens. The ice just doesn't kind of evaporate. What it does is it starts to roll into a scroll. Regular ice can't do that. So when we shared this with Dr. Gerald Pollack, who's one of the leading water scientists in the world at the moment, he said that that's most likely sheets of 4th phase water. Now that 4th phase water absorbs more light, it has negative charge, and those are the 2, for me, 2 of the most important pieces, and it also has an ordered molecular structure. It's also the kind of water inside of your cells. So water shares information in 3 ways as well. So we have signature patterns, which indicate the type of water it is. The top one on the left, you see it looks like a kind of hexagonal pattern. When you freeze water after you've just collected it from a spring, within an hour, you'll see very large hexagonal patterns. But if you've gone and bought spring water from the store in a plastic bottle or a see-through clear bottle, water, just like us, is very sensitive to artificial light and light at all. And so those structures start to degrade quite rapidly and end up becoming smaller and smaller and end up like little stars. Then we have rain, which looks like that fanning pattern. The middle one is filtered water. The one below that is municipal tap water, one of which I got from a hospital in New Zealand. And the bottom one, although a little hard to see, I've made a close-up one over here. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, whoops. Down the bottom anyway. So that's seawater, and it looks like kind of indented subwoofer stars. Then we have the art of water, and I always say that art is the heart of water. And you can see that I've printed out a picture, put my dish of water on top of it. I use a protocol of only 30 seconds, because water is quantum. The longer it's there doesn't mean that it's going to absorb any more information. It's almost as if it knows what you're thinking before you do it. And then there is hydroglyphs, and that's where I'm getting a little more scientific attention from because of the amount of repeatability. To say I have one hydroglyph, which is essentially a symbol, means I have to have seen the same symbol appear at least 50 times using a word influence. And I don't just use English. So I saw that water liked to design in pictures, so I thought, what about faces? You know, that would be quite curious to see if it designs different people's faces. So this is my friend Wendy. I printed her picture out, put my dish of water on top of it, and it designed her face. And then I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I put my petri dish of water on top of the face it designed, on top of the ice face, to kind of extend the conversation. So I did that, printed it out, and it designed a negative of her face. Now I continued the conversation further, actually, and even more so recently, where I got the ice face, and it ended up designing a kind of more slightly disordered, but you can still see a face. And then I showed it the black face there, and it designed another image of a face, and this time it's starting to look a little bit different, but it's got an eye and a mouth and everything, so it's really interesting to see that it's continuing on and that it's not so random, because it's easy. If you just start seeing this is just random. I have 54,000 photos of water responding intelligently, just to clear up the randomness, but somebody asked me to use a picture of Sadhguru, and you can see right at the top the side of the petri dish. Now, my petri dishes are the same size as my hand. I take all of my photos on my iPhone. I use a regular freezer and teach thousands of people how to do this. It is so simple and fun. So this was when I used a picture of a Roman coin. Actually, that's a close-up of a coin. This is a picture of Laurent Costa. He said, please show me the water in my photo. This is an interesting one. So I had a friend who was pregnant, and I asked her to drink some water, leave me some. And as she was thinking of her baby, she was holding her tummy. So when I froze the leftover water after she'd sipped from it, it designed an embryo. But if you can see, hopefully you can, down the bottom, there is I wonder if I can move that up a little bit. No, that doesn't work. There is a light hand where you can feel free to stand up if you can't see it. At the bottom, down here, you can see the mother's hand and light down there. And so what's interesting is whenever I see embryos, I always see this light around the spine that shines very brightly. And I have a friend called Dr. Mauro Zapatera out of Harvard, and he studies cerebral spinal fluid. And he literally says that he thinks cerebral spinal fluid is the portal to cosmic consciousness, and it is 99% water. Now, she sent me her ultrasound the next day, so I like to be able to add that in. This is a Maori tiki. This is a sacred pendant from the Maori people, and so you can see that it's clearly designed the face of the tiki, even with the tongue sticking out. So I like to extend conversations here with water. And there's always a reason why I use certain pictures. We'd be here forever. We've got a long way to go, but we'll be here forever if I explained everything as to why. But my father likes fishing, as I said, so shrimps came up. So the first one is the first picture I got, and then I let that melt and refroze it, and it designed an even clearer shrimp. Same thing I did here. So I used these two Egyptian statues, and rather than design the faces, the water only designed what's called the attif crown. With the one at the bottom, the middle one, or the picture in the middle, was the first freeze. I let it melt, and again we see a kind of attif crown there. I did the same thing with this one, where I put my foot over the water. The first top one was the first outcome, then I let that melt and refroze it. Now you might be thinking the water's only seeing the toes, which is the way that we think, because that's the only thing that's kind of showing there. But I've seen that that kind of stuff doesn't seem to matter to water, because water appears to see things from all perspectives and is not limited to time and space. So for example, if I was to show the water the microphone, we might see the actual shape of the microphone. And then if I did it again, I might see the pattern on top of the microphone. Then if there were any words on it, it might look like words on the side. So I get to see all these snapshots from lots of different angles from water. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we see different perspectives. So here's where it started to get really curious for me, because I'm at this point, you know, there's nothing stopping me by being curious. So I'm like, well, I'm seeing that words make a difference, pictures make a difference. Like, what if I just ask a question? So I literally said, well, do you know my name? And so the first response I got is the one top left. To me, it says VA. And you can see how I actually write my initials. It's just the same. I never showed water my initials, so that was very curious. I did it again, and you can see the VA. And then down the bottom left, I asked a slightly different question, and I said, what was my name at birth? So this time the V and the A are not linked, but there are two circles and then there's one circle. The two circles joining are a hydroglyph with the energetic meaning of conception, and the circle means completion. So it means complete conception as well as my two initials. And then the one beside it is where I basically fell asleep and it overfroze it, and you can see there's a VA. Now, as we continue it on, the one beside that is where I asked Buddha if it knew my two Indian names. I was given two Indian names at birth, Veda and Karan. So we got a V and a K in the ice, and then something that looks a little like Hindi just to the right of the K. So I'm going to show you a few examples, and we're going to get in some interesting stuff. So here is where I put my thumb into the water, and you can see that it designed the thumb with the nail quite clearly, but you might notice that the ice nail has a chip in it. Well, I chipped my nail at 3 hours later in exactly the same place. Here are some designs of different animals. The one with the dog, the dog nose, that dog sniffed the water, and the water designed his nose. I think Buddha has a sense of humour. The one at the top of the Schnauzer dog, I went to a cafe, and I saw this dog bowl out for thirsty dogs, and there was a Schnauzer dog drinking out of it. And I was like, oh, I wonder what that water would look like. And I made the weirdest request to the lady at the shop, and I said, can I have a takeaway cup so I can take some of that dog bowl water away? She looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, I tried to explain myself. But anyway, I went straight home and I froze it, and it looks like an etching. And down the bottom with a cat, that's my cat Luna. She likes to look in the water, and she looks like she's looking back. Here is some of the plant and fauna and vegetable world. Hibiscus flower. Ferns. Now, ferns are really interesting. I have an Indigenous friend from Hawaii, and he's given several talks on some of my webinars, and he said ferns are really unique in that they have not changed or, quote unquote, evolved for millions of years. He said that scientifically, 1 inch from the leaf of a fern is what's considered an alien atmosphere. It is different than the rest of the atmosphere around us. So I thought, what about man-made things? So I started putting different kind of man-made things in there just to see what would happen. And I mean, I get blown away by this all the time because I never really know what's going to happen. So I feel like I'm a child quite often in a state of wonder. This is really cool. So the picture on the right is something called a pātaka. It is a Maori food storage hut, and they would put gourds full of water in there. And the water that I collected was from an area where there was a lot of Maori settlement. And so I had given it no influence at all. I just froze it, and it designed into this design which looks like a pātaka. So I started going and finding historical records of this area, and I found a sketch of that, which was basically right beside where the stream was, and it was from over 100 years ago. So this is interesting because water appears to read potentials. So when I've put a seed into the water, it doesn't design the seed, it designs the outcome of the seed. So here we see that the one beside the seed, it designed the apple, and you can see the apple that I cut up to get the seed. Then I let that melt, refroze it, and the apple is still there the next day, and then left it for 3 days and refroze it, and the apple was still there. And I've seen that with biological things, such as blood, such as seeds, the impression seems to last, well, I don't even know how long it can last yet. Some can last for weeks, maybe even longer. So this is quite interesting. I'm going to talk more about seeds as we go along because that's an important piece. But here are some eggs. I've worked a lot with eggs. And what's interesting is that the one on the right, the ice image from that looks slightly different. And I was being given free-range eggs from a friend who had a rooster. So there was always a small chance that the eggs could be fertile. And you can't tell until you crack it open and you see a little dot on the yolk if it's fertile. So when I cracked that egg open, I found it was a fertilized egg, and it appeared that water knew before me. So this is one of my most shared studies because it is kind of inspiring, because I was always thinking what would be the most naturally informed water, and I thought, well, it must be amniotic fluid. But since I can't chase pregnant women around trying to hope that their water's going to break, I thought, well, the next best thing would be to use egg albumin, which is, I'm sure everybody's cracked an egg open. If you carefully do it, a thin, like, kind of saliva-like bit will come out first before the gloopy gelatinous part. When you freeze that thin saliva-like part, it can form 6 patterns in healthy free-range eggs and only 2 patterns in caged hen eggs. So this is an example. The free-range is on the left and the caged is on the right. So I won't get into too much about Luc Montagnier, but essentially I was inspired by him to see whether or not a good egg, quote unquote, could influence the bad egg, or would it be the other way around. So I did controls, and on the left is the control for the caged hen egg, and right beside it is the control for the free range. After leaving them overnight side by side, we see that the free range looks the same, but the caged hen has improved significantly. And I shared that on social media, and people were like, oh, yeah, that's cool, but it'll go bad if you surround it by bad eggs. And I'm like, well, let's try. We don't know. So I had the free range in the middle, and I put a bunch of caged hen eggs around it. And I did controls, and you can see and start to recognize the free-range egg there compared to the caged hen egg, and I used the same batch of caged hen eggs. And what we saw essentially was healing by proximity. And there's a close-up which makes it a little easier to see from the middle section. So the free-range egg is in the middle, and you can see it's still got those really beautiful volcano patterns. But the ones right beside it are caged hen eggs that have improved so significantly that they look like free-range eggs. And the ones that were not as close to the free-range egg improved, but not quite as much. So what we see is that the coherence of the free-range egg impressed itself upon and healed the caged hen eggs around it. But let's try it again. Here are my controls, same thing. And just to get more of a close-up, again, we see the same thing. We say that there is healing by proximity. So my conclusion from that study is that given that by molecular count we're 99% water, to really reduce it, if we start healing ourselves, we naturally heal those around us. And what's interesting is that none of those eggs were fertilized. So it seems that the potential for life was still there. And it makes sense, we're working with embryonic fluids. So nature doesn't want things to get worse. It actually wants things to improve. So it makes sense that the good egg would help the other eggs improve rather than downgrade. And I've frozen various different bodily fluids. So I think that you can use my technique even with urine, so you can get an idea of what's going on in your own body. So the left one is the urine from someone very stressed, and the one beside it is from that same person 1 hour after meditation. This one is from someone dehydrated. The one after that was after an hour after drinking a very nourishing spring water. And then I've used tears, and what's interesting is we see 4 chemical tears, and they're the kind of tears that happen when we cut an onion and we can't help it. It designed the iris of the eye, whereas the tears of different emotion showed very different stages of geometry. So grief didn't show very complex designs, and it's not 100% formed, whereas relief is actually extremely delicately patterned. It's quite complex. And laughing tears have a lot of light in them. This is breast milk. So I want to talk about the power of words, because I've used saying words, we all use words, and words have a power. But it appears that the written word too has a power. Ask anybody that's ever signed a document. You know, when you sign your name, that means something. When you read something, you can go and reread it, a love letter, you'll keep that, because that has meaning for you. So each word seems to have an energetic power. So my question was, well, will the water receive the energetic power of the word just by me writing it, by putting my petri dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds, removing and freezing? So let's see. So I've used different words in different languages. So up the top, you can see that there is, hopefully you can, I don't know how clear it is for you, but there is a solid heart, and it's in Hindi, it says pyar. And then Pugio is Latin for dagger. And then artificial intelligence is a really bizarre one. It does look like wires. And then I have Japanese that says yuki, which means snow. And the result is to the left of it. It looks like snowflakes. And I was also doing this because I thought, well, how is water conscious? Or is our consciousness impacting the water? So what if I use a word where there's no mental picture for it? And so I used the word ego, because ego, we don't buy ego at a store. We don't have a visual for ego. But what will water design? Water designed a long neck, big shoulders, a little face, and a giant balloon head. Grief was really interesting, because I thought maybe a broken heart, maybe tears. It designed a person with holes inside. When I used acceptance, it was very, very similar design of a person without the holes inside. This was really interesting. So my cat, as with many cats, can never decide whether it's in or out. And I was holding the dish with no influence. I do this a lot, where I invite water to share whatever it wants. So I'm holding the dish, and as I'm about to put it into the freezer, Luna is just meowing, and I said, "Are you in or are you out?" And then I just put it in the freezer, and I tried to let her out, and she wouldn't go out, so she stayed in. And I got the literal word in. When I said to water, "Who are you?" I got in the ice, "I am." And then I was playing "Fly Me to the Moon," and it literally spelt fly. And the one furthest away was not done by me. It was done by a lady that learnt my technique, and she literally asked the question, "Should I stay or should I go?" And she got her answer. This was one of the ones that blew me away. So someone asked me to say the word Yeshua, and to say the word Yeshua to the water. And so I saw this cool kind of cup design with what looks like a little wing to the left. But as I was looking deeper into the kind of cup, I noticed there was something that's a little bit unusual, and I highlighted over there. And it looked like writing to me, but not writing that I had any understanding of. So I put it on social media, and I just said, "Does this look like any writing to anybody?" And I had over 1,000 people respond to me, saying that is like handwritten writing, which is down the bottom for Yeshua in Hebrew. And that blew me away, because I don't know Hebrew. So I want to show that other people can do this, because you can do it too. So this guy overfroze it a bit, but it was kind of neat, because he was American, using coins as his influence, and the coins had a picture of Abraham Lincoln on them. What he got was the kind of the back of a man's head, or of a head, but it looks like there's a bullet wound in the back of the head, and that's what happened to Abraham Lincoln. Now, the odd one out there is the nail clippers. Why do that? Well, I have a friend called John who lives in Utah, and he's actually able to freeze the water outside, because it gets so freezing he doesn't need to use a freezer. And his nail clippers happened to be beside his petri dish as it froze. So he's great, because he been able to prove that this isn't the freezer blowing a certain way to make these fantastical designs. This was from a tourist came to New Zealand, collected some of the water in front of Mount Taranaki, and it designed the mountain. You saw this one. And so this is just a bunch of them. Honestly, there's thousands, and I just can't pick them all. This is a weird one. This lady drank some water and spat it back into the petri dish and froze it. And then she sent it to me, and she said, it's so weird, because she said, I just had my tongue pierced. So that was a really interesting one. This lady had a fish that she wants me to talk about all the time. It's called Swim Shady. And she used the water from his fish tank. So this is a question that I asked water. I was asked, can water be deceived? And I would not do this now based upon the very crazy thing that happened after I did this particular thing. Now, the reason that I did this was because the person was asking for a good reason. They were saying, well, you look at Victor Schauberger's work, look at Nikola Tesla. They created all this sort of amazing free energy, but towards the end of their life, their work was taken and used for more nefarious reasons. They wanted to know if water could be deceived or used for anything negative, and so that was the reason that I agreed to do it. So I said to the water, I said, can you please show me something really, really amazing, just between me and you? I won't share it. Immediately I froze it, and the guilt set in. And I'm like, I knew I was going to send it at least to the person that asked me to do it. And so as I'm feeling guiltier and guiltier outside the freezer, I'm thinking, gosh, I was using spring water for the work. I thought it's going to be totally disordered. And I pulled it out, and in the ice was a little disorder, but there were 2 letters that spelt something to me. And I was really taken aback and felt pretty bad. So the words were no. And what was so interesting about doing this is that water wouldn't play with me for an entire week after that. And I thought, oh God, I've blown it. This is terrible. Water was mad at me. And it was funny that I thought that, because that's completely wrong. Because water is never in judgment. It goes to anybody who is thirsty if we're lucky enough to have it. It does not judge us. We judge ourselves. You know what changed? What made it start playing with me again was when I forgave myself for doing it. Immediately once I'd done that, the water began to play with me again. So as I've said, water reads potentials. Here I put a seed into the water. It's a sunflower seed, and it designed a sunflower. Here I've done it again. Here's where I used a flax seed, and it designed the flax pod, which is where the seeds are. When I used an empty pistachio shell with no nut, it designed the shell. So I don't know if anyone here is interested in homeopathy. But I do think that there is a great deal to it. So what I would do, and I was using spring water, and the reason I didn't use distilled water is in distilled water, I have not seen water design very complex patterns. It has a signature pattern, but not a complex pattern. I think it's the salts and minerals that actually help water to store information or have what we call memory. So I wanted to see how homeopathic remedies would work in a water that's more like the human body. So what you can see, hopefully you can see, is that the images that resulted by putting 1 drop of a remedy into water look very much like the plant or whatever the actual remedy came from. But I've started to do repeated studies. So this one is using belladonna, and it looks quite similar. This one was using zinc, or zinc. This one was from using something called Arjuna, which is known actually to help the heart, so it looks quite a lot like a heart. This was from pine bark. These are arnica. These are 3 that were all done separately on different days, called Ali and Sipa. These are 3 from Ignatia. Now this is interesting because this lady sent this to me. It was just an organic discovery. She had put some drops of homeopathic remedies into her glass, put them into the cupboard, and was going to give them to her children, but didn't do that in the end. And so all the water evaporated. And she sent the leftover to me and said, well, look what it designed. So I thought it was ice. She said, no, I don't know exactly what it is. I think it is sugars and perhaps something like that have actually helped to design and form this flower-like pattern. So I wanted to try it myself. So I dissolved an arnica pill into the water, completely dissolved it and let it evaporate. And it designed the one on the right, which does look quite a bit like arnica flowers. So I would say for anyone interested in doing that, that's a really fun and simple thing to do. If you could isolate the remedy and see repeated patterns, then you have proof that there's something in the water. So this was from cabbage tree seed essence. This was from redwood flower essence. This was from this one that this lady sent me called Golden Spiral. So I like this topic because light is such a huge part of this, and also it's kind of an interesting concept. And I appreciate your patience, and I know I was late, and it's hard sitting down for a long time and listening to somebody talk, so I thank you so much for that. So a while ago, an Indigenous person told me that they could speak to bees. And they said that they would watch the hive for long, long periods of time until one day a bee somehow communicated and said, please don't look at our hive for so long. We don't mind you looking at it, but don't look at it for such a long time because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we like it to be darker. It's like, oh, that helps make something make sense for me. So what I've seen, if I get it perfectly, is as the water is starting to freeze, but before it's really taken off into form, at the tip of the ice, I can literally see with my eye, and I've photographed it and filmed it, a light that looks like a halo coming from the tip that looks like this. I actually think it's light that's paving the way for the design of the imagery. Because wherever there is light, water follows. And so the light is moving out of the ice, out of the water, and as the ice starts to chase it, it's like the water is catching the light. Which brings me to another aspect of light and eyes. You know, Nikola Tesla was really kind of obsessed with a specific pigeon. And one day that pigeon flew to his window, and it was the day that that pigeon died. And Nikola said, the light coming from the eyes of that pigeon was the brightest light I have ever seen. And recently I had a very strange encounter with a goose. I was in Christchurch, and it was scary for me to go there because I had been in both the big earthquakes there. And it was very dramatic because when it happened, when the Christchurch earthquake happened, and I will get to the goose, my daughter was only really tiny. She was about 6 months old. And the second earthquake hit. And I was on the phone to my sister. I threw the phone down. I went to grab Shanti just before the TV would have smashed on her. I was thrown into the bookcase. I went outside and I saw the fourth bedroom start to sink with liquefaction and this whole hole open up in the pavement of the driveway. So I had to off-road to go and get my ex-husband and our son. And when I finally got them, he took the 2 little children and I had to go and get my oldest son from school. So it was faster to run because the traffic was gridlocked. And so on the left-hand side there was the house, and then in the middle there's the road covered in liquefaction, and then there's the school where the children were waiting. So I went to cross. But I didn't realize that there was this giant car-sized hole in the liquefaction that I got sucked into. And I was sucked into it up to here, and it was like quicksand. It's a mix of like water and sewage and sand. I'm screaming for help. And some man tries to help me, and he gets sucked in. It's like this crazy comedy. But it wasn't funny at the time. And then somebody pulled him out, and I got pulled out. And so I'm this giant mud monster going to get my son. And finally, we left the next day, and I had never gone back until recently. And something pretty cool, interesting and quite meaningful to me happened. So I like to film different rivers. And so I went to the river, the Avon River, and there was a bridge going over it. As I'm filming, I see this goose do this incredible dance. Its wings were flying around, it was moving. I've never seen a goose do such a dramatic dance before, and I was filming it. And I was like, I didn't know geese could do that. It was this big Canadian goose. And then when it had finished the dance, both of its wings went down over the water, and it just kind of floated as if it was done. And so as it got closer to the bridge, I'm like, I don't know if he's okay. So I followed it to the other side of the bridge, and I saw that he was still floating with his wings out and his head in the water. So I ran down, and the water pushed him towards me. I picked this goose out of the water, and he was gone. He was dead. And why I'm linking it to this in light is that I looked into his eyes, and it was the last seconds of his life, and I saw light shine in his eyes and then just disappear. And then I was like, I don't know what to do with this poor goose. And so I figured he made this big attempt to get into the water, so I put him back into the water to let him go. But it was very special because I literally saw the light shining out of his eyes, and it just went. And that was something very special for me. So this man here, his name is Gennady Krokalev. He was a Russian scientist and psychiatrist, and he had read a magazine called See the Other Way Around. And in the magazine, it made a suggestion that the retina of the eye, which is mostly that jelly fourth phase water, can essentially hold an image from your mind's eye and project it like a hologram. Hello, little fly. And so what he did, he was working with psychiatric patients. He was a scientist and a psychiatrist. And he was working with them for 20 years, and they were having hallucinations, they were having visions. So he used a Zenith camera, which is a black and white camera, and he used scuba diving goggles, which he took the lens out. And this goggles went over the lens of the camera. And he photographed their eyes as they were having hallucination. And of all of the patients that he saw, out of 200, 117 of them could confirm that the images that came from their eyes were in fact the images that they were seeing in their hallucinations. Now, what happened to Gennady, sadly, is not an uncommon story. He rang his brother and he said, I have just found something that is going to change the world. And it wasn't this, it was something else. His brother rushed over, it took him 3 hours to get there. Gennady was sadly found hanging, and his work had been confiscated. So what he found, I have theories on, but his work is incredibly difficult to find. But I have 3 of the photos that he took of his patient's eyes. Now, remembering, this is coming from the light of the eye. To the left, it says antlers in Russian. You can see the face in the middle one, and the other one says snake. Now, this was repeated by more Russian scientists within the last 20 years, and rather than using psychiatric patients, they worked with someone who could remote view. And they did the exact same setup where they used the same Zenith camera, they used the scuba diving mask, and as the lady was sitting there tuning in, the scientists would stand behind a wall holding up numbers and shapes. As she tuned into the numbers or the shapes, she'd say, okay, I've got it in my mind's eye, and they'd take a photo of her eyes. In fact, all the scientists did that. And here are some examples of the triangle and the number 1. They ended up doing a documentary about it called Thought is Material. It's proven. I think that's what it's called. It's in Russian, but with subtitles. And this was fascinating because it meant that the thought, imagine, so there were two theories, so we'll get to that first. The first more popular than the second. The most popular is that the brain sends information to the retina of the eye, and the retina of the eye receives that information and projects it like a hologram in picture form. That's a little bit like my work, that we're taking information and it's being put into picture form. But it had to be in your mind's eye. The second was that there might be a secondary realm of consciousness of which we can't see. So I thought I'd do some telepathic communication just to see what would happen. The one on the left, the blue one, I closed my eyes and I wrote the word love in my mind's eye. And then I opened my eyes and I looked at the water, and you can see it spelled L-O-V-E. The other ones are where I basically transmitted the best that I could, and how you imagine telepathy to work, a circle, a rectangle, a triangle, and then interestingly the pyramid one became three-dimensional. This is a really important study that was done again in Russia. So they took a living leaf and they dissected a few pieces out of the leaf. Then they put the dissected part into a high-frequency electromagnetic field. And rather than see the dissected part, they saw the entire leaf, less the dissected pieces, which really suggests that there is a memory of the whole. It's called phantom transference. This has been well repeated. Have you ever met somebody that's had an amputated arm or leg? They say that they feel that it's still there. Well, I actually think that given this idea that we have a memory of everything in health as a whole, and that we have this subtle body, so around us is air. The fact that we breathe out means that there is water in the air. So there is a lot of water in the air, much more than we think there is, especially here in Dubai today with all the humidity. And so that water is attracted to the electrical charge of the human being. And although it's on a very, very minute level, if you imagine what a spider web looks like when there's dew on it, we have like this liquid crystal antenna all around us, and it is receiving information from outside in front of us in different areas, which is why when we go into a room and there's been a big fight, but we don't know that somebody's had a fight or something heavy's happened, we can feel it. Like, oh, I don't like this. Or we meet someone and we feel like we've always known them. And that is because our patterns are similar. We're reading each other's information. And what's interesting is the information is coming into the intuition, which is also a fluid world. So when we don't listen to our intuition, we often kick ourselves and go, I wish I had listened to what I already thought. Because just like with the thumb, it already knew what was going to happen with my nail. Your intuition is not limited to time and space. So when we get that gut feeling, we should really listen to it because it's already experienced every outcome. This is something practical I thought I'd add for people about water in certain colours. So we have, this is called Myron glass. So if anybody works with people who are sharing pretty heavy stuff, I found that Myron glass, which looks like it's black, but it's violet, seems to really, really help the diffraction of heavy energy. So if you work with people all day long who are sharing their stuff with you, that would be the water I would use. Now, the container for water. Now, the blue one is great because you can make something called blue solar water. And blue solar water is pretty much the only time where I would suggest putting water in the sun. Now, Victor Schauberger talked about water in the sun being lazy, whereas water preferred moonlight in shady areas. So when you put water in a blue glass bottle and light filters through it, I've actually seen this to be true, it is supposedly able to take anxiety and stress very, very quickly out of the body. So I have a friend who's a surgeon in the States, and she had the most horrendous thing happen, where her best friend ended up on her surgery table after a car accident, who had had serious head trauma. And she rang me, their surgeon, and said, what kind of water should I drink? Because the hospital water's terrible. What kind of water should I give her, is what she asked me. And she rang me at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I just said, make blue solar water. And so she started to get the spring water that was the best she could get, and she put it into the blue glass bottle and left it in the sunshine for half an hour. And she would give it to the lady. And she was able to actually see, after having worked with many, many head trauma patients, that her friend recovered 3 times as fast. And not only that, she was much less anxious. So it's a good one if you want something for someone who is going through a lot of high anxiety and needs to be feeling more calm. I've used this technique for self-diagnosis. After my car accident, the only thing I have struggled to eat and digest is carrots. So I had a tummy ache, I didn't know why, and I saw carrots, and what looked like carrots to me. I rang my friend, and she said that had made me food, and I said, is there carrots in that casserole? And she said, oh yeah, I just chopped them up really finely. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And this was when I was checking my fertility years ago, and it very much looks like ovaries with an egg inside. Okay, we have this is a really long presentation. I just realised that you're probably really tired, so I don't know how much more you want me to talk about, but I think this is interesting because I can touch on water and spirit, and we can whiz through a few things to get to the conclusion. So the question is, what is it that sees? And there was a study done on people who were blind. Born blind. So people who are born blind say that they don't dream in pictures like we do, they dream in other senses. People who are blinded later in life go on to still dream in pictures. So what's interesting is the study was done on 21 people who have had verifiable near-death experiences who were born blind and never seen the world or even dreamt in pictures. All of them, after their near-death experience, came back into a body that was blind. But with the doctors present and family present, they were actually able to say and express what each person looked like that was in the room and what they saw after they left their body. Even though they came back into a blind body, many of them went on to dream in pictures. So the question is, what is it that is seeing? And that kind of starts to come into this idea of, is it spirit? And how does water and spirit connect? My friend Isabel Friend thinks that hydrogen is the spirit of water. Hydro and Genesis and hydro water is the genesis of water, or the creation of water. Hydrogen is throughout the known universe. Do I think that that is true? Well, I don't think that any of us really know, but I think it's really good that we start having conversations. But when I tune in, I think it's more likely, well, in my humble opinion, and I'm always open to being wrong. You know, we're always learning, but I think it is probably condensed light. Because I think if water was the holy grail, then light would be its contents. We are all containers of water, but it is light that lights us up. It is light that people say they see leave the body upon death. So I worked with the dream time, wondering whether or not, how can I study water and when I'm not conscious. So I thought, well, when I'm dreaming might be a good one, because I don't know what I'm going to dream. So I would put a petri dish of water beside my bed with the intention that it captures some part of my dream. It was during lockdown, so I'd actually pulled the freezer into the bedroom. When I woke up, for the dreams that I'd forgotten, but I knew I'd dreamt, and you know what that's like, when you try to remember the dream, then it just keeps disappearing. Well, only then would I freeze the water, and the images that revealed themselves would literally jog my memory of the dream, and they were almost clearer in many ways than the usual imagery I get. And so that was curious to me. It's like, well, how is water accompanying me through the dream time? How is that possible? There is a word in Maori called wairua. It means, very rudimentarily, it means spirit, but if translated into English, it means two waters, the physical and spiritual waters. So what are the spiritual waters? Well, when it comes to homeopathy, if you imagine if, for example, the spirit, when it leaves the body, it leaves through a gaseous phase. Let's just entertain the idea. A gas, as it expands, it cools, which is why some people, they say they feel spirit as cold. And I think one of the many aspects of water as more spiritual is as an observer. Many people that have had out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences or deep meditation experiences have been able to observe themselves as a spirit looking at the body. Well, that's a really interesting idea and thought to think about, because what is it that is seeing? And what is its relationship with water? And I think there are many more states to water than we realize. I did a podcast with Robert Edward Grant recently, and he said that mathematically there must be more states to water. We know there's 4 right now, but the secrets are in the subtleties. So I've always thought that there are other states of water, and I don't know if water is conscious. I think all things have consciousness. But what I do know is that water and consciousness are so intimately intertwined that they appear to behave as one. My friend Moses Hackman says that water is the glove on the hand of consciousness. So I wanted to know, can I connect to spirit through water? This is my mum. We're nearly at the end. My mum was my best friend. She was the most beautiful person in the world to me, and she died in 1999 of cancer. I miss her a lot, and so I simply asked Water one day when I was really feeling her, and I said, Water, can you connect to my mum? So I had no idea what would happen. We had a lifetime of memories. Water could have showed anything. But when I lived in Japan, Mum and I would write letters to each other back in the day when there was no cell phones, no computers. God, that makes me sound prehistoric. But so I had these lovely letters, and at the end of every letter, my mum would make some attempt at drawing a circle, and her circles were so bad they looked like maps of Australia. And in the middle, she would do a little heart, and that was her little signature sign-off. So this was the ice image that I got. And every year on her birthday, I asked the water to connect to my mum, and I see a misshapen circle with a heart in the middle. But this year, I asked a slightly different question. I said, can you connect Mum to both my sister and I? Because my sister, Wendy, was missing her too. And Water designed, if you can see at the top, 2 circles with 2 hearts. This was my grandmother. Her name's Revis Bentham Green. I never met her, but I often feel very connected to her. She was pretty radical back in the 1940s when it really wasn't done to leave your husband. So she left him, remarried, went from England to Miami, and then caught this plane called the Star Ariel, and was going to Barbados for their honeymoon. But they never got there, because the plane went down over the Bermuda Triangle and has never been found. You can Google the Star Ariel to find more out about it. So I would wonder what happened to my grandmother, like what's going on with the Bermuda Triangle. So the article was about her and the people that went missing in the plane crash or whatever it was. And so I put my Petri dish of water on top of the article with the question, like, what's going on with the Bermuda Triangle? And I got an image, very, very unusual image. So it looks kind of like a vortex, right? I added this just because somebody's son lost their beloved dog, and she said, please, can you do something, because my son's so upset. And so I said, can you please connect to their dog? And did this little pour. And what I didn't know was that was, they had his paw set in sort of the cement thing, and they had it on the wall, and it looks very similar to this. Now, I'm not going to get into the hydroglyphs too much. They are the repeatable patterns. There's 64 examples of the hydroglyph for the words stairway and climb up. This is the marriage hydroglyph. they all came from playing music. So this was from playing the song, I'm not going to sing it, Single Ladies by Beyonce, and the tagline is, if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it. And so like, alluding to marriage. And here are 64 examples. And I do have videos of all of these, and I'm giving a presentation in Lisbon on this trip about the hydroglyphs and the power of words. I think it's nice to see repeatability. Lots of people like that. So this is the symbol we see for the word change and winter. This is the completion hydroglyph. This is the message hydroglyph. When I asked, what is a hydroglyph? It gave me 2 hydroglyphs. It gave me living and message. The living is the kind of hexagon-shaped flower up there, and the rest is that triangle. So it's a living message. So what is not reading words I want to say? I'm not saying that. It seems to be picking up the energy or the energy signature from a word, reverse engineering it back to some kind of living principle that we can see, that we can photograph, that we can touch, but we can also eat. So my children taught me something really, really interesting, and I'm going to whiz past some of this. So my daughter, when I was holding up a dish, asked me to have it. And I gave it to her because I thought she wanted to look at it, but she started to eat the ice. I'm like, what are you doing? And she said, it's good for me, Mummy. I was like, oh, okay. And then her brother did it 2 weeks later, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, it's good for me. I'm like, did you talk to your sister? And he goes, no. So over the course of years, they would do this. Now, after teaching many parents, they tell me that their children are eating the ice. Used to. And so what do these young people know that we don't know? So my husband, when we were living in America, he knew about this, and he's quite a curious guy. And so he was doing a study using words and my technique, and he was using plant medicine words. So for a week, he was writing the word ayahuasca, putting the dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds, then putting it into the freezer and photographing it. He helped me find another hydroglyph, actually, for the word visionary by doing that. But after every single time he did that, he'd eat the ice. And after a week, he came to me, and I have to say, he's not prone to exaggeration. He was a pilot, and he takes this kind of work quite seriously. And he actually works quite scientifically as well. And he said to me, so I took him seriously, he said, I actually think I need to start taking this a bit more seriously. He was having lucid dreams. He was starting to have a very, very mild experience of what it might be like to go on a journey. And I thought, wow, we can probably work with this. So I think he was a little freaked out. He didn't continue on too much of the eating the ice. He did more photography. But I started to share this with people that were learning the technique. And it's amazing how many people have insomnia. And so I said, well, I think the word will come out of the well of knowledge within you. You are an intelligent body of water. And so it might not be so logical. So one lady used a logical word. She used the word rest because she hadn't slept solid through the night for 4 years. She could wake up all the time. So she used the word rest. That felt good for her. She wrote the word. She did the process. And a week later, she reached out to me and she said, shocked that she actually slept through the night for the first time and she didn't know herself. Over the course of, it's been a couple of years now, 200 people have, or so, maybe a little more, have done this. And every single person has said that they have found that there has been some improvement in whatever they've been using it for. That's really interesting to me because, for example, I tried it. I don't get very many headaches. I had a headache. I'm like, okay, what's my word? And my word was purple. I'm like, not going to question it. Wrote the word purple, did the thing, started eating the ice. And before I'd even fully finished eating the ice, which doesn't actually take very long, I already had started to feel the headache to go away. This one lady had a vaccine injury. She couldn't walk. And I actually did an interview with her called, her name's Rachel Tudor on my Instagram. So she was so sick, and she was the first person on the beginner's workshop actually to use this method. And so she started with the word connection, And she was using filtered tap water because that's all she could afford. And a really interesting thing happened with her. For the first month, she just constantly used the word connection because that felt like what she needed. She would write the word, do the thing, eat the ice, no matter what it looked like. And in the beginning, this filtered tap water looked kind of spiky. After 9 months of doing this, and I don't know how many words later, she had a complete bill of health, but every single crystallographic image that she did had turned into what we call the creation glyph, which is one of the most complex patterns that we see. And this is still filtered tap water. So the tap water had healed along with her. And so what we're seeing is that you can get disordered tap water, because I know what those patterns look like, and you let it melt, and when you hold it to your heart for even 30 seconds, lovingly, and then refreeze it, you start to see now there's ferns, now there's hexagons, now there's flowers showing in this tap water. It's changed structurally, but it hasn't changed chemically. So this is more like seeing an emotion. This is what is energetic state of health that we're seeing. Now, tap water is like a sick person. That person might have been told they have cancer. But it's up to them how they feel. So if someone might come and give them a cup of tea or a biscuit or a cake, or I'm talking about all the things I like, and a blankie, and they'll feel grateful. They'll be like, oh, I feel somebody's caring about me. They'll start to feel wonderful that someone's caring. But the doctor would say, oh, you're still sick. But them starting to feel emotionally better is just like what we're seeing in the crystallography of the tap water improving. If we see that tap water can structurally change to look like spring water through loving expression, then it is possible, in my opinion, that humans, with an attitude of gratitude at the foundation of their healing journey, just that will start to manifest into reality. I think that it absolutely can happen that way. And there's too much stuff here. I'm going to go towards the end. I do find this interesting, though. This coding is something that we see, and I think if water was the container of the Akashic records, then that would make sense. And I think that some of this coding we're seeing could well be that we're seeing water constantly updating its information. I'm going to tell you a love story, and then we're going to finish. Hopefully people like a love story. So when in 2019, I went to the annual water conference where I met my husband. And before I went, I did some crystallography. And you can see down the bottom there's a heart, and at the top there's something that looks like a little plane. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe it's saying that because I was going with lots of loving energy and I wasn't looking for anything. So I just thought, oh, it's a nice reflection of what's going to happen and my energy perhaps. So when I got there, I met this lovely guy, and he looked completely different than he does now because he had a big beard. And he's just so beautiful and so lovely, and I found him so interesting. And he had seen my very first presentation. That's the first time I ever shared my work, actually, 2019. And he's seen the initials. You've all seen my initial imagery. And so he came to me and he said, oh, I've got something a bit weird to show you. And I said, oh, I like weird. And he showed me this photograph that he'd taken. And so when he was in the shower, he'd gone to grab something, and he noticed that the mirror had all steamed up, and there was something in the mirror in the steam. So he took a photo of it. And you can see that it was probably the cleaner who cleaned a certain way, but what he showed me, this is what he looked like when we met. He does look very different now. Was this VA, and he said, "What do you think it means?" And I'm like, "Oh, what do you think it means?" And so we had this long love story, and it was right throughout COVID, and we were separated for 7 months at the longest time. 2 days after we were married, I had to go back to New Zealand, so it was very difficult. But now he lives in New Zealand with me. and the children. And so I took this photo. I used the photo of us. He looks quite different now. And you can see that it designed, and if you can't see, I'm going to point it out. You can see my eye and the nose and the lips and his face kissing. And so I am very, very grateful to Ryan because he helps me to do what I do. And I think at the end of the day, it's all about love. Water is an expression of the love within you. And I always want to honour my children, my family, and my husband for helping me do this work and for taking it seriously. Someone once asked, what if water was God? And I'm not saying that that's true. What I'm saying is what they said was really interesting. Then I have one more thing. So this person on Instagram that was doing its rounds, they said, well, that would mean that God is in us and all around us, above us and below us. It would explain why a woman's water breaks when we're born and why some religions observe the ritual of baptism. If water was God, then that would mean that God has no gender. God takes the shape of the container God appears in, which would explain why we have so many different belief systems. It would mean that all bodies of water were holy, that a thunderstorm is a church without walls, that when the rain falls, it's an act of God's death giving life, and when it evaporates again, it's the day of resurrection. So this one person, this is the last one, I promise, said, why doesn't all the water in the bodies of the nefarious leaders of the world have a reaction that inhibits the functioning of their bodies in some short or long-term way? And I said, and I've touched on this, that water is not in judgment. It goes wherever there is life. It doesn't resist anyone who is thirsty, even if that person has done terrible things. It reflects whosoever looks upon it. There have been and still are horrific things done by the hand of man, but water is not the hand. Water is the seed of hope that lies within man so that change may happen. Thank you very much.